Well, they killed Star Wars. Their animated feature films are all flops now. The Marvel Cinematic Universe is on the way down. It seems like the Disney shareholder meeting from yesterday was absolute chaos. Maybe all of this is a good sign for the culture war. Maybe sensibility is back. Explaining entertainment, keeping you ahead of the culture curve. It's getting harder and harder every single day, not because yours truly has lost his touch, but rather because that culture curve is getting larger and larger as some of these big companies make big decisions. Some of them going in one direction, others going in the exact opposite. And well, there's Disney, which is going in both directions at the same time. They can't seem to figure out what they're doing. We'll talk about it. And if you were able to catch the shareholders meeting from yesterday, you know that Disney is in a world of hurt. I could not believe what we watched, what we witnessed, and it has been very enjoyable seeing all the various reflections on it, the wide spectrum of people's opinions about what happened. We'll break it all down. Joining me to help with this conversation today at a time when the culture war is bigger and hotter than it has ever been that any of us can recall, I have both Jonas J. Campbell and Martin Stone, both of thatparkplace.com. Gentlemen, welcome back to the channel.
Howdy do. Thank you for having me.
Good to be here.
All right. Now, yesterday, as I said, the Walt Disney Company had a shareholders meeting that was, I have no words for what we witnessed. What occurred was that Disney suddenly became a company divided not only by politics, but by morality, by the very philosophies that govern our everyday life. And it was a battleground where the various factions were letting it be known in no uncertain terms directly to the CEO what they thought. There are things that were brought up that Disney supports that we can't even talk about on this channel. That is how intense that shareholder meeting was. And I suspect that the people who were bringing up those issues probably did not tell the screeners that's what they were going to talk about until they were there. And then, boy, did they release everything at the CEO. From the opposite side of the political spectrum, you had people who were simply giving positive affirmation comments, not really asking any questions. And that's fine, except that it seems to me that the sensible center, which has mostly been silent in the past, and then the conservative side of things, that they have come to some sort of alignment when it comes to Disney, and then probably the entertainment industry more broadly, and then probably society at large. Now, this is not a political channel. This is not a socio-political channel, and we don't deal with those sorts of things. We don't endorse any political party. We don't endorse any politicians. We also know that at the time of this video, our country is going through something, if you live in the United States, which is unprecedented. We're not going to talk about that directly, but we will mention that due to what is occurring, our country has not been this divided, this divisive, and this polarly opposed to one another in any time that I can recall. We're going to talk about all of that, so I guess we're going to dive straight into it. We're going to dance around how hot all of this is. Gentlemen, before we do this, any thoughts on yesterday's shareholders meeting with Disney and just what went down?
I'm still processing the call personally and sometimes literally because of video files. I cannot believe that Bob Iger went as far as he did and spoke as clearly as he did to let everyone know what we've always suspected about him. First of all, the reveal about the Reedy Creek situation, that will be talked about in Washington, D.C.
Huge ramifications, huge. And Valiant Renegade and I will be discussing it in the video this afternoon.
That one caught my attention because of the things Reedy Creek did with the covenants that could last 30 years on the way out the door. I know that Park Place had a little story about that a couple weeks ago. If it's now Disney's official position that the state dissolved Disney's own private fiefdom, well, then now the state maybe has some leeway to say, well, you stepped into our pool. Now we get to play hardball. That's mixing metaphors.
Well, the state may say, we didn't know you were a government. How about that? That's interesting.
Right.
Now let's see what happens. And yeah, I agree. Now, all of that, Disney's faux pas when it came to the legal side of that, we'll explain it all, folks. There are lots of pixie dusters out there who would tell you that Iger had a good day. That is not, that's like telling roadkill that it's not so bad being in the position that it's in. Iger was just floored in that meeting, and we'll discuss it later. But without going into details of why that was so bad in terms of the Walt Disney World Reedy Creek situation, Disney stepped into that because of the culture war. They didn't have to step into it, but they entered into it, and Disney has sort of become the avatar for this battleground that is the culture war. And I want to talk about what the culture war is. Before we do, let's read this article from the Hollywood Reporter. This by Rebecca Sun. Racial and gender diversity in theatrical film regresses to 2019 levels. By the way, that title goes ahead and gives you the slant that the rest of the article will hold. It applies a value assessment to what is occurring. When separating theatrical and straight to streaming features, the gains in diversity for theatrical releases melted away, according to the latest UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report. We go down. The regression from the so-called racial reckoning of 2020 can be seen in representation and inclusion in film as well, according to the latest UCLA Hollywood Diversity Report. For this year's study in separating employment data between theatrical and straight-to-streaming features released in 2022, the gains in diversity for theatrical releases melted away, researchers found, noting that gender and racial diversity in many key jobs fell to 2019 numbers. This installment of the report focuses on films, specifically the 200 highest-grossing English-language releases worldwide, and the top 100 English-language original streaming movies as ranked by total U.S. household rating, which, by the way, ladies and gentlemen, that is already a skewed way of determining this because it assumes that because the content created, which would be most diverse, did not land, apparently, in those top 200 or 100 categories, that therefore the attempt was not made. That is a category or a categorical error. Gentlemen, what do you think about that? Do I have a fair criticism there?
Yes, of course. And this is a very one-dimensional way of looking at the world. And that one dimension is whether or not you are straight, white, or I'll just say straight white male. If you're not a straight white male, then you are diverse.
It's like we're playing out at the societal level the same arguments that you heard between 5-year-olds on playgrounds about boys are better than girls or girls are better than boys. It is that level of low resolution stupid, in my opinion. Martin, what do you think?
Oh, I completely agree. I've never really gotten this fascination with hitting everything by the numbers, probably because I do numbers for business, and I'd rather enjoy art for art's sake when I'm not on the clock.
Exactly. Let's read on. On the big screen, people of color comprise 22% of lead actors, 70% of directors, and 12% of writers, while women were 39% of leads and 15% of directors. The researchers found gender parity among lead characters in streaming movies. Slightly more streaming than theatrical movies had casts that were less than 70% white. These films also tended to do better in Nielsen ratings and the box office, and audiences of color represented the majority of viewers for 6 of the top 10 theatrical releases and over-indexed among all top 10 streaming films. One of the things that I never understand when I read this, and I think it's purposeful, is I don't understand what white means. And I don't know what of color means exactly. And I don't think that the people who write these things often know what they mean. For example, are you white if you are Italian? Are you white if you are Asian? Are you white if you're Japanese? Are you white if you are Polynesian? Are you white if you are an Inuit? I don't understand. Are you white if you're a Spaniard? Are you white if you're French? And if you're not white if you're a Spaniard, but you are white if you're French, that doesn't make sense to me. And it doesn't make sense to me if you are, if your family migrated from Spain to Latin America, does that then transfer you to being of color, even though you may have been white and or Eurocentric in the past? None of that makes sense to me. I think this is all a bunch of gobbledygook, and I wish that we would get back to, hey, let's put the best actors and best actresses on the screen, and let's do it in a way that looks like society when we're covering society in a particular region. Is that fair?
Of course, it's of course it's not fair. Or your point was valid, is what I'm trying to say.
They want it to be not fair in both ways, right? Fair and fair.
The problem that I see here is that when you take away all aspects of morality, men and women come up with their own aspects of morality to replace the ones that they've shaken off, and all they have left is diversity.
Yes, well, that's a good point.
It's the one thing they can still use to say, we are better than this person, and that other person right there, they need to be doing better. This is, if we take away all the standards, I'm still the best by this standard.
That's a great point, that you can essentially do all these horrible things that were brought up with Disney, right? You can have inappropriate material targeted at children, bypass their parents. You could have relationships in a country that is controlled by dictatorship and is doing all kinds of horrible, evil things to people. You can manufacture merchandise using involuntary and very low-paying labor wages to individuals who would wish to be doing something else very much. You can do all of that. And as long as you wave a flag and you say that you're diverse and you recognize people primarily by the color of their skin or their biological sex, unless that's no longer convenient, then you are therefore virtuous. Martin, am I missing anything with that?
I don't think so. But I do have a question for the two of you. The paragraph that you read there about how there was more gender parity among lead characters in streaming movies, sure, and in streaming series. I've got a proposal here. I want you guys to I want to bounce off you guys and see what you think. What if the sort of narrative-driven long-form series lends itself more to things that women want to see, and the shorter movie, spectacle movie that you go to see at a theater lends itself towards what men want to see? And so the audience naturally selects itself along those lines, and this isn't nearly as much of a problem as the Hollywood Reporter writer is making it out to be.
Jonas, what do you think?
I can't say with long form television versus short form movies, which is funny to call movies short form, but it would be like comparing books read by men versus books read by women, or nonfiction books read by men versus fiction books read by women. There is enough demographic difference in the consumption of that material that you are probably onto something. But to try to say, well, this is the data, it's not equal. And again, fetishizing equity, it's not equal. Therefore, there must be something wrong with what's going on here. And we all know about villains who crave balance above everything else.
Exactly. Well, my reply to that would be simply that because of the category error we discussed at the beginning of the video, where they're limiting this artificially to only the top rated, the top successful items in both box office and streaming, well, that makes up a minority of the total product provided. And so we don't have a way of knowing the actual numbers for every single item that was delivered to, let's say, North American audiences in 2022. We're simply limiting it based on the success rates. And I don't know that that's a great way of doing this. So I don't have a good answer on that one. Well, one thing I do know, go ahead, Jonas.
There was a similar article, I believe Deadline ran it, that was talking about a similar disparity in the top grossing films not long ago. But it was the same thing. They sorted not by production, but by box office. Again, going to outcomes rather than intentions, rather than equality of opportunity. Again, this craving for some fictitious form of balance, that even if we met that form of balance, they would just move the goalpost again to whatever the next form of equity is. It needs to be people of color who also enjoy the company of cats or something silly like that.
Well, it's also perfect Eurocentrism and ethnocentrism because it assumes that white people, whatever that is, whatever that nebulous term might be, that white people are the majority and everyone else is the minority, and they're people of color. But that's so stupid because the largest racial group in the world, if I'm not mistaken, are people of Chinese descent. And then after that, you have people of Indian descent. We're talking about Asia, not quote unquote white. So that's just crazy to me. I also, I find this article to be dubious because it says the two most streamed movies of 2022 were Turning Red and Encanto, both coming-of-age tales about young girls of color. Well, I'll grant that for Encanto, but I don't think that's true for Turning Red. I don't think it's the second most streamed movie of 2022. In fact, what we've seen on Nielsen would demonstrate that it probably was not. So that's very peculiar to me. Now, gentlemen, I want to make a theory to you before we go into our next article, and then we'll wrap this thing up. But I want to present a theory to you. And what I'm noticing is that across the board now, we are seeing entertainment companies begin to pull away from divisive content. And I think that this article is sort of a proxy for that. I'm not sure that it's actually about racial and gender diversity as much as it is about a regression of the particular theories out there about how to produce movies, sort of the DEI content that we've been looking at, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that really is what this article is discussing. But as I watch that sort of content be flushed out a little bit, dropped away a little bit, it makes me pause and wonder if audiences are not already indicating where the marketplace and therefore where society is. When we look at Disney, when we look at the response that audiences are now giving to the company versus, let's say, the Mario movie, which looks to be on pace to do exceedingly well, Disney is well, they've just floundered out there, not only with The Little Mermaid, pun intended, but also with Lightyear and Turning Red and Encanto. People forget that Encanto was a box office flop. And so I wonder if audiences have had enough of the pandering to certain divisive sociocultural movements, and if that's not a good sign that maybe, even though we're watching as political figures are put through unprecedented actions, even though we're watching things happening around us that we have never seen before, perhaps we have finally witnessed the pendulum shift. And it's just that the mainstream media and access media, of course, have not yet recognized it. You guys do you feel that the winds of change are now here?
Oh, absolutely. The market has responded. I'm sure. I am so sure that the Super Mario Brothers movie is going to do well, and that is a movie that, by all reports, is not woke. I really hope I don't have to eat either of those statements by the end of the week.
Well, I think we're okay, but we'll find out, won't we? I'll be doing a review this Wednesday, so tomorrow. Martin, what do you think?
I don't know. I'm cautiously optimistic, I think. And I guess saying optimistic gives away my hand, because I do want pushback against the DEI stuff. I would like to see a meritocracy reassert itself in the Western world. But at the same time, I think we're dealing with people who have a religious fervor for diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you can't just beat that by people not listening to them anymore.
Okay, so I'm glad you bring that up, and I want to touch on that before we read the article. So what I view coming out of this, now, I agree with you that there are people who have turned this into a quasi-religion, and the quasi-religion is one in which we divide people based on immutable attributes, immutable differences. It is essentially tribalism combined with postmodernism. Postmodernism being the idea that you question everything and that might is right. Power is all that matters. There is no objective truth. There is just, can you win or not? And what I'm seeing across society is that over the last few years, that movement, that group of people who, by the way, they have been heavily influential within Disney, but that group of people, they have attempted to eradicate the spirit of voluntary play with reciprocity. And what I mean by that is that throughout even down to mice, creatures have to play with one another. It's actually built in. It's a cognitive system inside of mammals that we need to play with one another in order to have society. If you take the very young from mice, right, pups, the little baby mice, and you prevent them from playing with one another, or if for some reason they cease to play with one another naturally, then the rat society will cease to function. It will devolve into chaos. It's the same thing with apes and chimpanzees. And it seems to me that it's the same with humans. If we cease to be able to play the game together, then chaos ensues. And
what would happen if you
quarantine
them for 2 years?
Well, that would not go well. That would be rather dystopian. Oh, wait, we lived through that. But anyway, it's amazing to me that at the core of this belief system that's been pushed through Hollywood and through entertainment is the idea that one side no longer is willing to play with the other because might is right. And you might think about that in the terms of someone playing chess. And you could say, well, what would happen if you were playing chess with someone and they suddenly said, I'm going to change the rules of chess, and you're not going to be allowed to negotiate those changes. You're not going to be allowed to veto those changes. And if you disagree with the changes, I'm going to knock all the pieces off the board and not play with you. Well, you end up with fascism. You end up with totalitarianism, the very thing that they purport to be against. And so I think, it's a long-winded way of getting here, but I think that the sensible, mostly silent center and the right have grown completely and utterly exhausted with the idea of let's not play together. And though we will see screeching ahead as these other parties realize, oh, we're being shut down now. What we saw with the Disney earnings call and what we are seeing with the market responding so strongly against the movies of the woke, right? And so strongly in favor of things like Top Gun Maverick, John Wick 4, Sonic the Hedgehog, the Mario movie, Minions, etc. These things that are not divisive in any way. I think the cat's out of the bag. This thing is coming to a wrap, and we're going to see that particular side strike out angrily over the next months and years, perhaps. But I think we're moving on. What do you guys think?
I think it's well said. The corporate kingdom has ceded ground. They've abdicated their throne, and they are just letting the world move on without them.
Well, that's a sad place to be, isn't it? That's like the child who doesn't get their way in Monopoly, and so they just go sit in the corner with the few fake dollars they have left and pretend.
We still have to pay attention until they get rid of until they don't have the rights to Bluey in the United States, though.
True that.
I'm actually a little afraid of the DEI leftist coalition falling apart because I've thought for nearly a decade now that when that PC side of the culture tears itself apart, they're going to get really, really nasty with each other. And you're going to see a resurgence of some pretty bigoted language coming from the left as they all fight with each other about who was the reason this all fell apart.
Well, I think we're there, and I do want to say, again, we're not a political channel. We're not talking about classical liberalism. We're actually talking about the people who have decided that they are the gatekeepers of entertainment and pop culture, and they are going to transform not only the way that we can see ourselves on the screen through quotas and initiatives, but also that they're going to transform the very narratives that have undergirded narrative structure for eons, right? So the idea of the hero's journey is turned on its head. If you are of a certain category, you no longer have to succeed over any kind of adventure. You simply have to sit there and pontificate about how awful everybody else is while the adventure unfolds before you. Let's take a look now at the article from That Park Place. This is by Pam Fitzgerald. It's talking about the Disney shareholder meeting, but and I love this tweet that we've got from Pat Stephen here, where Iger just having such a bad time.
Excellent job, Stephen.
I want to run through just how bad this was for Disney. And again, this coming down to this culture war that we're in, this culture war that's, I worry about it because, as I said, it's not just that I think that the sensible center and the right have sort of aligned together now and are sick and tired of this other particular thing we're doing. But like I said, the shrieking and this anger that we're going to see, Martin, the same thing you're talking about, I think it's going to manifest itself into the world. And so it does worry me. But here's what we had to say from Pam. In one situation, that's talking about Iger, compared modern socio-political issues, such as the education of children on bedroom issues, as being the same as fighting in World War II. Talk about a major mistake by a CEO. In another case, Iger struggled to explain how he was both against agenda-driven content and simultaneously in favor of it. His replies were terse and sounded tired. It wasn't just all negative, however. Disney was also peppered with positive comments from politically active commentators who didn't want to ask questions. Instead, They just wanted to make a positive correlation between their particular brand of politics and what Disney has been doing. Essentially, in doing so, they further affirmed that Disney has fully entered into the political arena as a stakeholder in a particular direction. Finally, the absolute knockout blow may have come from a question about Reedy Creek. We'll talk about that later in the afternoon. But I think that the reason that Iger was thrown off by the Reedy Creek question and thrown off about this other stuff is I think that some of these individuals at the top have been living inside a bubble and they don't understand the vociferous opposition that they face now from what I view to be the majority of people who are sick and tired of this. And by the way, this potential trial that we're looking at coming from one of the leading candidates, the leading candidate from one of the parties, I think that's going to take up all of the oxygen in the room, including with entertainment once that takes off. And I worry that this will cause the hardened people of one political direction to be separated from the center and then from at least the reasonable right. I worry that we're going to stretch apart from one another so much so that entertainment really has to bifurcate into two different markets almost, because how are you going to please people who are so far in two different directions?
It's almost as if we have two different cultures in the same country, in a way that if you were to say,
right down to the philosophy,
right, down to the food you eat, that one would judge another for the kind of things they put in their mouth every single day, or if you're part of a religion and you adhere to that religion, oh well, you're obviously on this side of the aisle. Now, not to get too far down politics, but politics is unfortunately hand in hand with what Bob Iger is pushing here. He has made it so that you are either a consumer of his content with your eyes closed, or you're a person who has principles and takes a stand to say, no, that's not okay, Bob. It's so hard. I don't want to try to divide our audience and say, if you watch it, you're this. If you don't watch it, you're moral or something like that. But it is so difficult to just say, I want to turn on the TV. I want to escape this world and maybe learn something better by watching this entertainment. But instead, the entertainment is meant to bring us back into the world, remind us of the things that make us angry, remind us of the things that disappoint us. They don't point us towards optimism. Current Disney doesn't point us toward optimism. Current Disney points us towards melancholy.
Tribalism.
Yeah, tribalism and melancholy.
Yes, it has stripped away the idea that the individual can inspire and rise to do great things regardless of the immutable attributes, those things that we were born with. And it's switched it now to this very low resolution thinking that how you look and who your parents are and how you act, let's say in the bedroom, that those are the defining qualities by which you are totally measured. Martin, I'll give you the final word on this. What do you think? You said you're cautiously optimistic. Are you cautiously optimistic for Disney, or are you cautiously optimistic for the culture at large? How do you think this is going to impact entertainment going forward in, let's say, the next 2 years?
I think for the culture at large, I'm cautiously optimistic. Just from the way the three of us all speak, it seems to me we all would have grown up in an era in America where it was a unified popular culture for the most part. But that hasn't always been the case. You want to look back in the 50s and 60s, and even before then, there were pockets of different cultures all over the place. The Southeast had a culture, the Southwest had a culture, the Mid-Atlantic states, the Midwest, California, Oregon, all had their own different cultures. So I'm not entirely sure a bifurcated entertainment complex is all that bad. I just hope that both sides end up with good production quality, and they can fight out their messages in front of us all instead of just slipping it into children's content and hoping to indoctrinate a generation.
That's a great point. I think that's a good one to stop on. Folks, if you like content like this, consider clicking the like button, share, subscribe, and you can stick it to the algorithms when you click it. We're talking about the notification bell. Memberships for this channel are being turned on Thursday during the Pro Show, 5 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time. You are not going to want to miss all of those amazing membership perks that we are going to have. I suspect some channels out there are going to begin replicating what we do, which we consider to be the highest form of flattery. But we are going to empower citizen journalism when it comes to entertainment, and I think you are all going to be rather pleased with what we have planned for you. We covet your comments, so please drop one down below. And wherever you are, whatever you're doing, in spite of all the crazy culture war stuff, in spite of everything that may be happening in the news and in entertainment, keep learning, keep growing, having fun.